Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to do a charcoal drawing of a black wolf. It's another drawing in this wildlife series. So a black wolf, I thought that it would be a nice contrast. A black wolf and a white snowy winter background. Nothing fancy, just a few details in the back. The reference is going to be in the description as usual. As for the materials, I initially started working with these Koh-i-Noor pencils, but I simply ran out of the charcoal pencil. So eventually I switched to different ones, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm also going to be using vine charcoal or willow charcoal, so soft natural charcoal, and the paper I'm working on is Fabriano sketching paper, about 9 times 12 inches in size. So I have the wolf, I have the ground, and now I'm going to shade the background. I'm going to shade the background very lightly. And by the way, I did the sketch of the outline of the wolf with a black pencil, which means that it's going to stick to the paper. So once I start blending this soft charcoal, those lines will still be in place, and that's important for me, so that I don't lose that sketch. So I shaded the background with a little bit of vine charcoal, and then blended that with a paper towel. I want to have a little bit of value so that I could establish the contrast between the lighter parts of those mountains. I'm going to have some mountain peaks in the background, and I'm going to draw these with erasers. So I started with a kneaded eraser first to lift up a little bit of value, but I also needed to draw some shadow areas of those mountains. So I added a little bit more value with a piece of vine charcoal around the mountain to create a little bit more contrast. And then I'm going to add a little bit more to the shadow side of the mountain. So I'm kind of blending around the peak with a brush and with a paper towel. I'm using the brush when I want to push the charcoal in a little bit harder, and I use the paper towel when I want to blend a little bit more softly and fade towards the edges, because this is also going to be a vignette. And now I continue to work with the pencil eraser because I felt that it was more convenient if I want to draw these smaller shapes. So I drew the light side of the mountain peak, and now I'm going to add the shadow side. I'm just going to draw that with a piece of vine charcoal, and I'm going to establish these shadow areas. So I think you can tell by the shadow areas that the light is coming more from the right side, meaning the left side is the shadow side. Of course it's coming from above, but it's usually coming a little bit more from one side than the other. So I'm making these parts of the mountain cast a little bit of shadow to the left, and I want to fade the bottom of the mountain. I want to fade it into the mist, and I just want to have the top or the mountain peak stand out and catching some light. So that's going to be my background, more or less. Here I started working on the main subject, and as you can see I switched to a different pencil. I ran out of those Koh-i-Noor charcoal pencils because the one that I had was very short and I couldn't really sharpen it properly anymore. And I switched to Master's Touch woodless charcoal pencils. I'm going to use 2 grades, medium and soft. For the most part I'm going to use the medium charcoal pencil, which is the one that I'm using now. And this other one, this longer one, is the soft charcoal pencil. This one is supposed to be a little bit darker, but when you press harder, it can be a little bit difficult for the camera to capture the difference between the two. But there is a difference. But to further enhance the contrast between the one ear and the other, I took away a little bit of value off the ear at the back and made the opening of the ear closer to us a little bit darker. So now I'm working on the snout area and shading that, paying attention to which parts of that mouth and the nose area are supposed to be lighter and which of them are supposed to be darker. Here at the top, around the neck and the upper back area, we have some much longer fur. So I'm drawing that long fur using slightly longer pencil strokes and also trying to group them a little bit into clumps so that they taper a little bit, but also at the same time to vary their direction a little bit so that the fur looks a bit more natural. I'm going to move on with one of the front legs because at the top there is a lot of shadow and it's mostly dark. In those areas where the fur is short, I'm not going to worry too much about the texture. I'm just going to drag the pencil and try to create something that looks like short fur, and then go around the edges to clean those up because obviously I need to have a clean edge between the main subject and the background. In those areas where the fur is longer, like around the neck area, I'm simply going to use a bunch of longer pencil strokes, trying to imitate the appearance of that fluffy, longer fur. And the thing that I wanted to do with the eye, I wanted the eye to remain a lot lighter than everything around it. That way the eye will stand out nicely. Even though maybe it's not quite that light in the reference, I wanted to emphasize that contrast and leave it a lot lighter. So here I'm doing a bit more work on the fur. Some of these lines appear shorter because not because the fur or the hairs are shorter because of the foreshortening, because some of them are kind of pointing a little bit more towards us. So I need to take that into account as well while I'm doing the work with a pencil. And once I blend everything, the fur starts to look a lot more natural. There's also a little bit of shadow here because the shoulders are casting a bit of shadow onto the neck area. So the light source is coming more from the right side. So there's going to be more shadow to the left, and the shadows are going to be cast from the right to the left. Here I'm just refining the appearance of the fur, adding some more of those larger shadows like that cheek area before I move on to the rest of the body. Now I'm going to add some more shadow areas between the shoulders and the rest of the body. And these shadow areas, these darker areas, are very important because they allow me to explain the anatomy of the animal. So we can see that transition between the chest and the shoulder area and the neck. There is more shadow there. We can see a little bit of shadow being cast by the shoulder onto the neck. Now we're doing a little bit of work with a pencil eraser, and I'm basically trying to make some parts of that dark fur a little bit lighter, and the way that I'm doing that is just by pulling these short strokes. The same thing that I did when I was drawing the fur with a charcoal pencil, but this time instead of the darker marks I'm making lighter marks. I'm going to make some parts of that fur a little bit lighter because some parts of it are kind of maybe reflecting a little bit of light, maybe glistening a little bit, or they're simply more exposed to the light source, so they're going to be a little bit lighter. Also, the fur is not going to be completely black. In some parts of the body the fur is going to appear lighter, so I need to take all of these things into account. On to the other front leg here. Whenever I need to do a little bit more precision work, I switch back to the medium charcoal pencil. Whenever I need to draw something a little bit darker, I use a soft charcoal pencil. This is a very muscular looking wolf with long fur, so he's going to appear like a very large, powerful animal. The legs, however, are a little bit more slender. This other leg is also, one of the hind legs here, is also much darker. It's largely in the shadow. And now I'm drawing a lot of fur here on the shoulder area and the midsection of the body. I'm just going to draw some short fur on this front leg. It's too short for me to pull these longer pencil marks, so I just shaded it by dragging my pencil. And now I'm going to blend it with a brush, softening that texture, but also making the whole thing a little bit darker in the process. So, you see, when you're shading the body of the animal or whichever subject it is that you're drawing, you can first establish all of the larger relationships between lighter and darker areas, or you can go segment by segment. I usually prefer to work segment by segment because it gives me that feeling of progress, and it helps me deal with my own impatience. Because if I were to block in the whole thing at once without refining any of the smaller parts, it would look like a mess to me, and I would probably get impatient and maybe even mess it up in the process. But here, this way, when I'm working segment by segment, it's a lot easier for me to stay focused and to stay patient and motivated. So first I did the head and the neck. I did a little bit of blocking and I determined where the darker areas are. Then I refined the fur a little bit. I did the same thing with the legs, and now I'm doing the same thing with the midsection area. I'm just going to shade the upper part a little bit more and leave the belly area a little bit lighter, because apparently it's covered with some slightly lighter fur. And then I'm just going to blend and blend with a brush until it's softened, and of course until it also becomes a little bit darker, because one of the main advantages of using blending tools when drawing fur is that you don't have to draw every single hair. So it not only helps you with the texture and the appearance of the fur, but it also helps you with the amount of value. That's one of the things that I always take into account, and I always know in advance. I know that something is going to get a lot darker once I go over it with a brush. I talked about it in some of the previous videos where I did drawings of other animals, because like I said, I'm doing a series of commissioned drawings of wildlife in charcoal, and these are all done in the same format, so about 9 times 12 inches and in charcoal pencil for the most part. I'm drawing the tail. This is going to be a little bit darker. It's a very long tail with some longer fur, so I'm going to push that in. I first did a little bit more work around the edges. I tried to be a bit more careful there to make sure that the shape looks good, but the middle part I covered that a little bit more quickly because I don't have to worry so much about the texture there. The tail is a little bit darker, and there's also a little bit more shadow on it. I'm also adding a little bit more shadow here on the ground. I'm going to make some indications of the shadow areas where maybe to show maybe the shape of the terrain and things like that. Here I decided that this middle part of the body ended up being a little bit lighter than I expected, so I needed to go back in and add a little bit more value and texture using a medium charcoal pencil. So I'm just going over it one more time. I'm going to go over it one more time and rework it and blend it with a brush once again, and then it's probably going to look pretty good. I just need to make sure that I have a sufficient amount of material, because the belly area does appear to be a bit lighter than the upper back area. At least it appears to be covered with a lighter fur. But it can't be completely white or anything, because obviously Obviously it's in the shadow, it's facing down, facing away from the light source, so it's going to have a substantial amount of value anyway, even though it is covered with lighter fur. I hope that I'm making sense. Anyway, I'm doing a bit more refining with a pencil eraser now, just drawing some lighter clumps of fur and making the fur look more three-dimensional. I say I make it look more three-dimensional with an eraser. That's because you're basically increasing the range of value. When you're pulling these lighter marks on top of the darker areas, you're increasing the range of value, and when you have a greater range of value, you have a better opportunity to make something look more three-dimensional and more realistic. I'm mostly done with the wolf. I'm going to add a few more details to the background. I want to have a few winter trees here in the back. I'm going to draw these with a piece of vine charcoal, and then I'm going to do some erasing with a kneaded eraser, or maybe a pencil eraser, but mostly with a kneaded eraser. So let's see how that goes. First I'm drawing the shape of the tree just like I would normally, but because it's partly covered with snow, I will be doing some erasing on top of it. I'm softening everything with a brush now, and just adding a few more darker areas before I move in with an eraser. And now I have this kneaded eraser. I'm just going to keep reshaping it and remolding the tip with which I'm going to be erasing these lighter areas, so parts of the tree or those branches where there is some snow. Just a little bit more here, just to increase the contrast between those snow-covered lighter segments and those darker segments which are below them, which are in the shadow and which aren't covered with snow. So that's one tree, more or less, kind of like a fir tree, but maybe with a simplified shape. I'm going to draw another one, slightly smaller, a little bit further away than this one, maybe a slightly more irregular shape, just doing a little bit more erasing. And I think I'm mostly done here. I put my signature on the left side. I'm going to refine the shape of the tail and just do a little bit more refining on these trees before I wrap it up. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. I added another mountain peak here on the left. I felt that the composition looks better this way. Anyway, if you want to see longer videos and more content, check out my Patreon. Bye for now. Thanks for watching.